Millionaires abandon their own daughter's baby in the trash, but the maid rescues him. Hello, welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications. In a forgotten corner of the outskirts of Philadelphia, where the concrete merged with the hazy sky and dreams evaporated into the polluted air, stood a mansion made of stone and glass, as imposing as it was cold. It was the residence of the Caldwell family, a clan whose wealth was only surpassed by their obsession with appearances. Arthur Caldwell, a businessman whose sharp gaze cut through the air like a knife, and his wife, Elena, a woman with a painted-on smile and a heart that had long withered, lived in that palace of vanities with their daughter, Olivia, a 16-year-old whose beauty was as fragile as the delicate vases that decorated their home. In this house of secrets and lies, where the walls whispered stories no one dared to tell, worked Miriam, a Ghanaian woman with skin as dark as night and a smile as radiant as the stars. Her calloused hands were a stark contrast to the delicate glassware she dusted every day, while her eyes, deep pools of ancestral wisdom, silently observed the drama unfolding before her. One spring morning, as the cherry blossoms in the garden donned their pink attire and the air was perfumed with promises of renewal, Elena discovered the secret Olivia had been hiding for months. The young girl, whose body had started to rebel against tight dresses and impossible expectations, was pregnant. Elena's scream reverberated throughout the house, a wail that shook the very foundation of that fortress of appearances. Arthur, torn from his office by the sound, burst into his daughter's room, his face contorted with rage and shame. "What have you done?" he spat, his words lashing out at Olivia's fragile figure as she curled in on herself, hugging her belly as if to protect the life growing inside her from the coming storm. Elena, recovered from the initial shock, began weaving a web of lies and excuses, her mind working at lightning speed to find a way to conceal this blemish on the perfect canvas of their reputation. "No one must know," she decreed, her cold eyes locked on her daughter, who cried in silence. As the Caldwell family spiraled into a vortex of recriminations and desperate plans, Miriam continued to clean in silence, her ears attuned to every word, every sigh, every threat. In her heart, a seed of compassion began to take root, a strength that would soon lead her to make a decision that would change the course of many lives. The days that followed were a living hell for Olivia, confined to her room as her parents whispered angrily, plotting how to salvage their precious reputation. The young girl, abandoned by the father of her child and betrayed by those who should have protected her, sank into a deep depression. Arthur, obsessed with keeping up appearances, refused to entertain any option that might tarnish the family name. "No one must ever know," he repeated like a mantra, his bloodshot eyes a testament to sleepless nights and days filled with anguish. Elena, for her part, crafted an elaborate web of lies. To the outside world, Olivia had contracted a mysterious illness that required absolute rest. Visits were forbidden, calls were screened, and the young girl became a ghost in her own home. Miriam, observing all this with a heavy heart, felt the weight of the secret pressing on her chest each time she entered Olivia's room to bring food or change the sheets. The girl's lost gaze and swollen eyes, red from crying, reminded Miriam of her own youth back in Ghana and the stories of so many other women trapped by circumstances and societal expectations. As Olivia's belly grew, so did her parents' desperation. Arthur spent more and more time away from home, drowning his worries in work and whiskey. Elena, now a shadow of herself, wandered the mansion's halls like a restless spirit, muttering increasingly outrageous plans. It was during a stormy night, when thunder rattled the windows and rain pounded furiously against the roof, that Elena made a decision that would seal the fate of them all. Her eyes gleaming with near-manic determination, she announced that the baby had to disappear. "We'll give it up for adoption," she said, but her words concealed a far more sinister plan. Olivia, too weak and scared to protest, simply nodded through her tears. Arthur, relieved that someone else had taken control, agreed without question. And so, on that pitch-black night, the fate of a life yet to see the light of day was sealed. Miriam, hidden behind the half-open door, felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. In that moment, She made a decision that would change her life and the lives of many others. She would not allow that innocent child to suffer the consequences of adult cowardice and mistakes. With determination burning in her chest, Miriam began to plan. Every night, after the house fell into an uneasy silence, she would sneak into Olivia's room. There, in barely audible whispers, she would speak to the baby growing in Olivia's belly, promising it a future full of love and hope. As the due date approached, the tension in the Caldwell mansion became unbearable. Elena, consumed by anxiety, watched her daughter's every move like a hawk. Arthur had become little more than a shadow of a man, broken by the weight of a secret that threatened to destroy everything. When Olivia finally went into labor, the skies over Philadelphia were painted a foreboding gray, as if nature itself sensed what was to come. The doctor, a man who had agreed to keep the secret in exchange for an exorbitant sum, arrived in the dead of night, his black bag swinging ominously as he ascended the marble stairs. His cold, steel-like eyes scanned the room, now turned into an impromptu delivery room, where Olivia, pale and trembling, lay in bed. Her muffled cries were stifled by a pillow Elena pressed against her face. "It's too late for any other option," the doctor said emotionlessly. "The baby will be born tonight." As the storm raged outside, and within the walls of the Caldwell mansion, Miriam's resolve deepened. She had seen enough. She would act decisively to protect the innocent life caught in the storm of adult deceit and shame. As the hours dragged on, Olivia's cries grew weaker, blending with the doctor's cold orders and Elena's frantic whispers. Arthur, unable to bear the sight of the birth, had retreated to his office, drowning his cowardice in glass after glass of whiskey. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, a sharp cry pierced the silence of the mansion. A small, perfectly formed baby had entered the world. Miriam, moved by a maternal instinct that transcended blood, was the first to hold the child in her arms, gently cleaning its face with tenderness that stood in stark contrast to the coldness of the atmosphere. But the joy of the birth was fleeting. No sooner had the umbilical cord been cut than Elena snatched the baby from Miriam's arms with a determination bordering on madness. "The child will be abandoned," she announced, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying resolve. "Tonight, far from here, where no one will ever connect it to the Caldwell family." Olivia, exhausted and dazed by the sedatives the doctor had administered, could barely protest before falling into a restless sleep. Arthur, dragged back to reality by the gravity of the situation, nodded mechanically, too much of a coward to oppose his wife's plan. Miriam, horrified, watched as Elena wrapped the newborn in an old blanket and placed it in a plastic bag. The housekeeper's pleas fell on deaf ears. "If you say a word of this," Elena threatened, her eyes blazing with a mix of fear and determination, "I will make sure you never work in this country again." With her heart shattered, Miriam watched as Arthur and Elena left the house in the dead of night, taking the baby with them. The muffled cries of the child, stifled by the plastic, burned themselves into Miriam's memory, a sound that would haunt her nightmares for years to come. But Miriam was not a woman who gave up easily. In her heart, forged by the hardships of her life in Ghana and her struggle as an immigrant in America, a flame of determination ignited. She would not allow this innocent life to pay for the mistakes and cowardice of adults. She waited, counting the minutes that felt like hours, until the Caldwell's car returned. The silence that enveloped them was more telling than any words. Wasting no time, Miriam pretended to finish her duties and said her goodbyes. Her mind was racing, already planning the rescue. As soon as she stepped out of the mansion, she broke into a run. Guided by a mix of instinct and desperation, she made her way to the dumpster where she knew the Caldwells had abandoned the baby. With trembling but determined hands, she searched until a faint cry led her to her goal. When she pulled the child from the bag, Miriam felt as if the world had stopped for a moment. There, in her arms, was the most precious life she had ever held. With tears in her eyes, she cradled the baby to her chest, silently promising it would never be alone again. Without losing a second, Miriam took the baby to her modest apartment in a humble part of the city. Along the way, her mind raced, planning how she would care for the child and protect it from those who had rejected it. She knew the path she had chosen would be filled with difficulties, but in her heart, there was no room for doubt. Upon arriving home, the first thing she did was bathe the little one, washing away the remnants of that terrible night. As she dressed the baby in clothes she had hurriedly purchased from a 24-hour store, Miriam thought of a name. Gabriel, she whispered. Remembering it was the 25th of December. Because you are a gift, little one, more loved than you'll ever know. That night, as Gabriel slept peacefully in an improvised crib, Miriam made the most difficult decision of her life. She knew she could not return to work for the Caldwells, not after what she had witnessed. With trembling hands, she wrote a resignation letter, inventing an excuse about a new job. The next morning, with dark circles under her eyes revealing a sleepless night, but with an unshakable resolve in her gaze, Miriam called the Caldwell mansion. Elena's voice on the other end sounded tense, almost hysterical. Miriam, maintaining her calm, announced her decision to resign. The reaction was immediate and violent. Elena, gripped by panic, began to beg and then to threaten. "You can't leave us like this. You can't abandon us," she screamed through the phone. Arthur, roused from his stupor by his wife's shouting, joined the conversation, offering more money and empty promises of a better future. But Miriam stood firm. "Don't worry," she said, masking the storm inside her with a calm tone. "I'll come to collect my things when I can." With those words, Miriam hung up the phone, closing not only the conversation but also a chapter of her life. She looked at Gabriel, who slept, oblivious to all the drama surrounding him, and knew she had made the right decision. From that moment on, her life would be dedicated to protecting and loving the child the world had abandoned. The first few days with Gabriel were a whirlwind of emotions for Miriam. Every cry from the baby filled her with a mix of joy and fear. Joy for having the opportunity to care for such an innocent life, and fear for the enormous responsibilities she had taken on. But Miriam was not one to back down from challenges. With the same determination that had defined her life, she threw herself into the task of raising Gabriel. The sleepless nights passed in a blur of feeding bottles prepared with love and diaper changes made with increasingly practiced hands. During the day, while Gabriel slept, Miriam searched frantically for a new job that would allow her to support her adopted son. Fortune, that capricious mistress, seemed to smile on her at last. After weeks of relentless searching, Miriam found employment at a small neighborhood cafe. The owner, an elderly woman with a generous heart, not only offered her a modest wage, but also the possibility of bringing Gabriel to work. And so began a new routine for mother and child. Each morning, Miriam strapped Gabriel into a makeshift baby carrier and headed to the cafe. There, among the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the hum of conversation, the little boy grew, lulled by the clinking of cups and the affection of the regular customers, who soon became an extended family. Months passed, and Gabriel thrived under Miriam's loving care. His pale skin, white as milk, contrasted with his mother's dark complexion, but no one who saw them together could doubt the deep bond between them. The child's eyes, a blue as intense as a summer sky, lit up every time Miriam entered his line of sight. As Gabriel grew, Miriam faced new challenges. Every milestone in the child's development was a cause for celebration, but also for concern. Was she doing the right thing? Could she give Gabriel everything he needed? These questions haunted her in the silent nights when the weight of her decision seemed overwhelming. But with every smile from Gabriel, with every babbled word, with every unsteady step, Miriam found the strength to keep going. She promised herself that she would do everything possible to give Gabriel a life full of love and opportunities, the very things that had been denied to him at birth. Time flew by, and before Miriam knew it, it was time to enroll Gabriel in school. With her heart in her throat, she filled out the forms, inventing a story about Gabriel's absent father to avoid awkward questions. Every lie weighed heavily on her soul, but she reminded herself that it was for the child's sake. The first day of school was bittersweet. Gabriel, excited for his new adventure, barely looked back when he entered the classroom. Miriam, on the other hand, lingered at the school's entrance long after the bell rang, wiping away tears she wasn't sure were from pride or fear. The primary school years passed in the blink of an eye. Gabriel proved to be a brilliant student, eager to learn and full of curiosity about the world around him. Determined to foster his thirst for knowledge, Miriam spent her few spare hours at the public library, searching for books and resources to feed her son's inquisitive mind. But as Gabriel grew, so did the questions. Questions about his father, about why his skin was different from his mother's, about his place in the world. Miriam, torn between the desire to protect her son and the need for honesty, struggled to find answers that would satisfy Gabriel's curiosity without revealing the painful truth about his origins. It was on Gabriel's 6th birthday that the reality of the outside world crashed into their small bubble of happiness. During the birthday party, lovingly and painstakingly organized by Miriam in the neighborhood park, one of Gabriel's classmates made an innocent but devastating comment. "Why is your mom black and you're white?" The silence that followed was deafening. Gabriel, confused and hurt, looked at Miriam for answers. The other children, sensing the tension in the air, began to whisper among themselves. Miriam, with her heart pounding, took Gabriel's hand and led him aside, away from the curious stares. With tears in her eyes, Miriam hugged her son and said the words she had rehearsed for years, hoping this moment would never come. "Gabriel, my love, you are the greatest gift life has ever given me. It doesn't matter the color of our skin. What matters is the love that binds us. You are my son, and you always will be." Gabriel, with a maturity that surprised Miriam, nodded slowly. "I love you, Mama," he whispered, burying his face in her chest. In that moment, under the afternoon sun and surrounded by the noise of a children's party, mother and son silently renewed the bond of love that united them. But that incident was only the first of many. As Gabriel grew older, the differences between him and Miriam became more apparent to the outside world. Comments at school, stares in the street, and the uncomfortable questions from well-meaning but insensitive neighbors all began to pile up, creating an invisible pressure on both of them. Determined to protect Gabriel from the cruelty of the world, Miriam redoubled her efforts to create a home filled with love and acceptance. Every night, after putting Gabriel to bed, she would sit in their small living room, planning how to face the challenges she knew were coming. She saved every penny she could, dreaming of offering Gabriel an education that would open doors that had always been closed to her. Despite the obstacles, the bond between Miriam and Gabriel grew stronger with every challenge they overcame. Far from letting the taunts or hurtful comments get him down, Gabriel developed a resilience and compassion that amazed everyone who knew him. In school, he became a defender of the marginalized, using his intelligence and charisma to bring his classmates together beyond superficial differences. Miriam watched her son's growth with a mix of pride and fear. Pride for the extraordinary young man he was becoming, and fear for the challenges she knew still lay ahead. Every night, after Gabriel fell asleep, Miriam would kneel by his bed and pray, thanking God for the miracle that was her son and asking for strength to guide him on the path ahead. The years flew by, and before Miriam knew it, it was time for Gabriel to start middle school. At the age of 12, he was already distinguished not only for his intelligence, but also for his empathy and leadership abilities. At school, he was admired by teachers and classmates alike, always ready to help others and fight for what he believed in. But as Gabriel entered adolescence, the challenges multiplied. The contrast between his pale skin and Miriam's dark complexion became more and more evident, fueling rumors and speculations among those who couldn't, or wouldn't, see beyond appearances. One day, after an especially difficult day at school, filled with curious stares and whispered comments, Gabriel came home with slumped shoulders and eyes filled with unspoken questions. Miriam, who had learned to read every gesture and expression of her son, knew immediately that something was wrong. "What's wrong, my love?" she asked, sitting beside Gabriel on the old couch they had rescued from the street years ago, and which had now become the heart of their home. Gabriel, his voice trembling with emotions he was struggling to control, finally gave voice to the doubts that had been gnawing at him. "Mama, why do people say you can't be my real mother? Why do they laugh and say we're different?" Miriam's heart broke into 1,000 pieces at the sound of the pain in her son's voice. For a moment, she considered telling him the whole truth, revealing the story of his birth and how he had come into her arms. But the fear of losing him, of that truth driving a wedge between them, paralyzed her. Instead, Miriam took Gabriel's hands in hers and, looking him directly in the eyes, spoke with all the conviction she could muster. "Gabriel, listen to me. Don't let anyone tell you who you are or who you can be. Our family is different, yes, but that's what makes it special. Love doesn't know color or blood. You are my son, and I am your mother, and nothing or no one can change that." Miriam's words, filled with love and determination, wrapped around Gabriel like a protective blanket. The young boy, moved by his mother's strength and sincerity, hugged her tightly, letting the tears he had been holding back flow freely. That moment marked a turning point in Miriam and Gabriel's relationship. Strengthened by his mother's unconditional love, Gabriel decided that he wouldn't let the opinions of others define who he was or who he could become. With renewed determination, he threw himself into his studies, determined to prove his worth, not by the color of his skin or his mother's, but by his actions and character. Miriam, for her part, redoubled her efforts to support her son. She worked extra shifts at the cafe, saving every penny she could to pay for tutoring and books to feed Gabriel's thirst for knowledge. The nights grew shorter as they balanced work and study, but Miriam found strength in the light that shone in her son's eyes every time he learned something new. As Gabriel progressed through high school, his reputation as an exceptional student began to spread beyond the walls of his school. Teachers and counselors, impressed by his intelligence and work ethic, began talking about scholarships and opportunities at prestigious universities. For Gabriel, these possibilities were like windows opening onto a world of opportunities he had never imagined. But with every new prospect, he also became more aware of the sacrifices Miriam had made and continued to make for him. Guilt and gratitude mixed in his heart, fueling his determination to succeed, not just for himself, but for the woman who had saved and loved him unconditionally. One night, as Miriam was going through the bills at the kitchen table, Gabriel approached with a serious expression on his face. "Mama," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I want you to know that I'm going to get a scholarship for college. And when I become a doctor, I'll take care of you, just like you've taken care of me." Miriam looked up from the papers, her eyes shining with unshed tears. For a moment, she didn't see the 16-year-old boy standing in front of her, but the helpless baby she had rescued from the trash so many years ago. With a lump in her throat, she stood and embraced her son, unable to express in words the pride and love she felt. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Gabriel immersed himself in his studies with an intensity that amazed even his most demanding teachers. He spent hours in the public library, devouring books on biology, chemistry, and anatomy, determined to pursue his dream of becoming a doctor. Miriam, meanwhile, faced her own challenges. The work at the cafe had become more demanding, and the long hours on her feet were beginning to take a toll on her body. But every time exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she thought of Gabriel and the bright future that awaited him, and she found the strength to keep going. The day Gabriel received his acceptance letter to the state university with a full scholarship was one of the happiest of Miriam's life. Mother and son danced in the small living room of their apartment, laughing and crying at the same time, savoring the triumph they had achieved together. That night, as Gabriel slept with a smile on his lips, Miriam sat at the kitchen table, staring at the acceptance letter under the soft glow of the lamp. Her heart swelled with pride, but it also ached at the thought of the separation that loomed ahead. The years at university flew by in the blink of an eye. Gabriel immersed himself in his studies with a passion and dedication that amazed both professors and peers alike. Every weekend, he returned home, loaded with books and stories, eager to share with Miriam every new discovery, every small victory. Miriam listened attentively to every word, marveling at the brilliant and compassionate young man her son had become. Even though the long hours at the cafe left her exhausted, she found renewed energy in Gabriel's visits, in the light that shone in his eyes when he spoke about his dreams of becoming a doctor. It was during his final year at university that Gabriel faced one of the biggest challenges of his life. A professor, impressed by his talent and dedication, offered him the opportunity to participate in a research program abroad. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a giant step toward realizing his dreams. But accepting it would mean being away from Miriam for months. The night Gabriel told Miriam about the offer, she felt as if the world had stopped for a moment. Her first instinct was to tell him not to go, that she needed him close. But seeing the mix of excitement and doubt in her son's eyes, she knew she had to be strong for him. "You have to go," she said, fighting against the lump in her throat. "This is the opportunity we've worked so hard for. I'll be fine, and I'll be here waiting for you when you return." Gabriel, moved by his mother's sacrifice and unconditional love, hugged her tightly, promising he would make her proud. And so, with his heart torn between the excitement of what was to come and the pain of the impending separation, Gabriel set off on his new adventure. The months that followed were difficult for Miriam. The nights grew long and silent without Gabriel's presence, but she kept busy with work and clung to the weekly calls from her son, in which he excitedly told her about his research and discoveries. Meanwhile, Gabriel thrived in his new environment. His intelligence and compassion quickly made him a valuable member of the research team. But despite his successes, he never forgot where he came from. Every night before going to bed, he looked at the picture of Miriam that he kept by his bedside, silently thanking her for everything she had sacrificed so that he could be there. The day Gabriel returned from his program abroad, Miriam could barely contain her excitement. She waited at the airport, her heart pounding, until she saw her son emerge from the crowd. The young man walking toward her was no longer the boy she had sent off months ago. Gabriel had transformed into a man, with a newfound confidence in his step and an even stronger determination in his gaze. The hug they shared was long and intense, filled with all the emotions that words couldn't express. And when they finally pulled apart, Gabriel looked into Miriam's eyes and said the words she had dreamed of hearing for years. "I did it, Mama. I've been accepted into medical school, and it's all thanks to you." The years in medical school were a whirlwind of emotions and challenges for both Gabriel and Miriam. The young man threw himself into his studies with a passion bordering on obsession, determined to become the best doctor he could be. He spent long nights in the library, studying anatomy, physiology, and pharmacology until the words blurred before his tired eyes. Miriam, for her part, continued to work tirelessly at the cafe, saving every penny she could to help Gabriel with the expenses that the scholarship didn't cover. Though the exhaustion sometimes threatened to overwhelm her, she stayed strong, inspired by her son's dedication and the bright future that lay ahead. As Gabriel progressed through medical school, his reputation as an exceptional student spread throughout the faculty. Professors and peers alike admired not only his intelligence, but also his compassion and his ability to connect with patients during clinical rotations. It was during his third year of medical school that Gabriel faced one of the most difficult cases of his career up to that point. During a rotation in the pediatric department, he found himself treating a 6-year-old girl with a rare, life-threatening illness. The child, scared and confused by the endless treatments and tests, refused to cooperate with the doctors. Gabriel, remembering his own childhood and the moments of fear and uncertainty, approached the girl with a gentleness and patience that surprised even the most experienced doctors. He spent hours sitting by her bed, explaining each procedure in words she could understand, telling her jokes and making her laugh, even in the hardest moments. Little by little, the girl began to respond to the treatment. Her recovery was slow but steady, and each small progress was celebrated by Gabriel as if it were a personal victory. When the day finally came for the little girl to be discharged, her parents hugged Gabriel with tears in their eyes, thanking him not only for saving their daughter's life, but for restoring their hope. That night, when Gabriel returned home, he found Miriam waiting for him with a special dinner. As they shared the meal, the young man told his mother about the girl and how her case had reminded him of the importance of compassion in medicine. Miriam listened with pride, recognizing in her son's words the echo of the lessons of love and empathy she had worked so hard to teach him over the years. As Gabriel neared the end of his medical training, he faced a crucial decision, choosing his specialty. Though he was drawn to several areas of medicine, he ultimately decided on pediatrics. His experience with the sick girl had solidified his desire to work with the most vulnerable patients, those who needed not only medical care but also understanding and affection. The day of Gabriel's graduation was one of the most emotional of his and Miriam's lives. As the young man walked across the stage to receive his diploma, Miriam watched from the audience, tears of pride streaming down her cheeks. In that moment, all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, all the moments of doubt and fear had been worth it. After the ceremony, while the other graduates celebrated with their families, Gabriel searched for Miriam in the crowd. When he found her, he hugged her tightly, whispering a thank you that contained all the love and gratitude he felt for the woman who had saved and raised him. That night, as they had dinner at the small restaurant they had frequented for years, Gabriel handed Miriam an envelope. Inside was a deed to a house in a quiet neighborhood, not far from where Gabriel would be doing his residency. "It's for you, Mama," said the young man, his voice thick with emotion. "So you don't have to work so hard anymore. So you can rest and enjoy the life you deserve." Miriam, overwhelmed by the gesture, couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged her son, remembering the helpless baby she had rescued so many years ago. In that moment, she knew that all the sacrifices, all the hardships, had been worth it. Her Gabriel had not only become a brilliant doctor, but also a compassionate and grateful man. The years that followed were filled with success and fulfillment for Gabriel. As a pediatric resident, he quickly earned a reputation as not only a skilled doctor but also a professional deeply committed to the emotional well-being of his young patients and their families. Miriam, for her part, was finally able to leave her job at the cafe and enjoy a quieter life in the home Gabriel had given her. Though at first, she felt strange without the routine she had grown accustomed to over the years, she soon found new ways to stay active and useful. She began volunteering at the hospital where Gabriel worked, reading stories to sick children and offering support to worried parents. It was during one of these volunteer shifts that Miriam had an encounter that would change her life, and Gabriel's, forever. While reading a story in the pediatric waiting room, she noticed an elderly woman watching her with a mix of curiosity and recognition. At first, Miriam didn't give it much thought, accustomed to the curious looks she sometimes received. But when she finished reading and was about to leave, the woman approached her. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice trembling. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Miriam, intrigued by the woman's expression, nodded and followed her to a quieter corner. The woman introduced herself as Patricia, a name that made Miriam's heart skip a beat. "I believe you worked for my family many years ago," Patricia continued, her eyes filling with tears. "And I believe that Dr. Gabriel, the pediatrician everyone speaks so fondly of, is my grandson." Miriam felt the world stop around her. All the memories of that terrible night, the abandoned baby, her desperate decision to save him, came flooding back with overwhelming clarity. For a moment, she considered denying everything, protecting the secret she had kept for so many years. But when she looked into Patricia's eyes, she saw the same remorse and pain she had seen in Gabriel's eyes so many times when he faced questions about his past. With her heart pounding, Miriam made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. "Yes," she said quietly, "Gabriel is your grandson, and I am the woman who saved him that night." The words fell between them like stones in a pond, creating ripples that spread far beyond their understanding. Patricia, overwhelmed by the confirmation of her suspicions, collapsed into a nearby chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Miriam, torn between the instinct to comfort and the desire to protect Gabriel, stood frozen as a storm of emotions raged inside her. The days that followed that encounter were a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions for Miriam. On the one hand, she felt that Gabriel deserved to know the truth about his origins. But on the other hand, she feared that such a revelation could destroy the relationship they had built over the years. Every night, she wrestled with the desire to protect her son and the growing certainty that secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, had the power to poison even the strongest bonds. While Miriam grappled with this dilemma, Gabriel continued his work at the hospital, unaware of the drama unfolding around him. His reputation as a compassionate and skilled doctor continued to grow, and he soon found himself leading a research team dedicated to finding innovative treatments for rare childhood diseases. It was during one of these research projects that fate decided to intervene in Gabriel's life once again. A patient was admitted to the emergency room, a man in his 60s who had suffered a heart attack. The case was assigned to another doctor, but as Gabriel passed by the room, something about the man's face struck him as strangely familiar. Intrigued, Gabriel checked the patient's medical file. The name on the chart made his heart skip a beat. Patrick Donovan. Though he didn't know exactly why, that name stirred an unease in him that he couldn't shake. He decided to take on the case personally, feeling that somehow it was important. As Gabriel treated Patrick, he found himself increasingly intrigued by the man. There was something in his eyes, a mix of sadness and regret, that resonated deeply with him. During their conversations, Patrick often looked at Gabriel with an expression the young doctor couldn't quite decipher, as if he were trying to remember something important. Patrick's condition was serious and required an urgent blood transfusion. However, his blood type was rare, and the hospital didn't have enough reserves. Without a second thought, Gabriel volunteered as a donor, discovering in the process that he shared the same rare blood type as Patrick. That night, after saving Patrick's life with his donation, Gabriel returned home exhausted but satisfied. He found Miriam waiting for him, as always, with a hot meal and a warm smile. As they shared dinner, Gabriel told her about the elderly patient and the strange connection he felt with him. Miriam listened in silence, her heart pounding as the reality of the situation dawned on her. When Gabriel mentioned Patrick Donovan's name, she saw the color drain from her mother's face. "Mama, what's wrong?" Gabriel asked, alarmed by her reaction. "Do you know this man?" In that moment, Miriam knew she could no longer keep the truth hidden. With tears in her eyes, she took Gabriel's hands in hers and began to tell the story she had kept locked in her heart for so many years. She told him about the abandoned baby in the dumpster, about her desperate decision to save him, and about the years of love and sacrifice that had followed. Gabriel listened in shock, unable to fully process what he was hearing. His carefully constructed world seemed to crumble around him. When Miriam finished her story, a heavy silence fell between them. "Why are you telling me this now?" Gabriel finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Miriam, her heart broken but determined to be completely honest, told him about her encounter with Patricia at the hospital and how Patrick's appearance had forced her to confront the truth. "The man you saved today, Gabriel," Miriam said softly, "is your biological grandfather, the same man who once decided to abandon you." The words fell between them like lightning, illuminating long-buried truths and opening wounds neither of them knew existed. Gabriel stood from the table, needing space to process this monumental revelation. He walked to the window, staring out into the night without really seeing anything. Miriam watched him in silence, her heart torn between the fear of losing him and the relief of finally having shared the truth. After what felt like an eternity, Gabriel turned to her. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just that night, but every day since then. You are my mother, Miriam. The only mother I've ever known, and the only one I'll ever need." With those words, mother and son embraced, their tears of pain and relief mingling as they faced this new reality together. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Gabriel. On the one hand, he was grateful for Miriam's unconditional love and the life she had given him. On the other hand, he felt a burning curiosity to learn more about his origins, to understand the circumstances that had led to his abandonment. He decided to confront Patrick in the hospital, seeking answers to the questions that had tormented him since Miriam's revelation. When Gabriel entered the room, accompanied by Miriam, the elderly man looked at them with a mix of confusion and recognition. "Dr. Gabriel," Patrick said weakly, "what's going on?" Gabriel took a deep breath before responding. "Mr. Donovan, there's something I need to tell you. I am your grandson, the baby you and your family abandoned all those years ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Patrick looked from Gabriel to Miriam and back again, his eyes filling with tears as the realization of what he was hearing hit him with full force. "Oh, my God," Patrick whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "All these years. How is this possible?" With a calmness that surprised even Miriam, Gabriel began to recount the story of his rescue and upbringing. Patrick listened, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks, the weight of his past mistakes visible in every line of his face. When Gabriel finished, Patrick reached out a trembling hand. "Forgive me," he begged. "I know I don't deserve it, but please, forgive me. I was blinded by fear and shame, and I made the biggest mistake of my life. But look at you now, the man you've become. I'm so proud and so sorry." Gabriel looked at the outstretched hand, a storm of emotions swirling inside him. Part of him wanted to reject the gesture, to deny any connection to the man who had abandoned him. But another part of him, the part that Miriam had nurtured with love and compassion all these years, understood the power of forgiveness. Slowly, Gabriel took Patrick's hand. "I can't say I understand, or that I forgive you completely," Gabriel said firmly. "But I'm willing to listen, to try to understand. Not for you, but for myself, and for the woman who has been my mother all these years." Miriam, watching the scene with tears in her eyes, felt a mix of pride and fear. Pride for the compassionate and strong man Gabriel had become, and fear for what this reunion might mean for their relationship. Patrick, overwhelmed by Gabriel's generosity, began to speak. He told them about that terrible night, about the fear and shame that had driven them to make such a drastic decision. He spoke of the years of regret, of how the weight of what they had done had slowly poisoned his family. "Your grandmother, Patricia," Patrick said, his voice choked with emotion, "never forgave herself. She spent years searching for you in secret, hoping to somehow make amends for what we did. And now, to know that you've been so close all this time, that you've become such an extraordinary man. It's a miracle we don't deserve." Gabriel listened in silence, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On the one hand, he felt an undeniable connection to this man, a piece of the puzzle of his identity finally falling into place. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the pain and anger that surged at the thought of how he had been abandoned. Miriam, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke. "Patrick," she said softly but firmly, "what you did was unforgivable, but fate has brought us here today, and perhaps it's an opportunity for redemption, for healing old wounds." Miriam's words seemed to break an invisible barrier in the room. Patrick, overwhelmed by emotion, began to cry openly, his shoulders shaking with each sob. Moved by a compassion he hadn't known he possessed, Gabriel stepped closer to the bed, placing a hand on the old man's shoulder. "I can't promise everything will be perfect," Gabriel said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I'm willing to try, to get to know you, to understand. But you need to understand something. Miriam is my mother. She gave me life in every way that matters, and that will never change." Patrick nodded through his tears, grateful for the chance he had been given. "I understand," he said, his voice breaking, "and I am eternally grateful to Miriam for doing what we couldn't. She truly is your mother, and she deserves all our respect and gratitude." At that moment, as if fate wanted to underline the importance of this encounter, Patricia entered the room. She stopped in her tracks, taking in the scene before her. Her husband crying, Gabriel by his side, and Miriam watching with a mix of love and concern. What's going on here?" Patricia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Patrick, still weeping, reached out to his wife. "Patricia, darling, sit down. There's something you need to know." And so, in that small hospital room, for lives, intertwined by fate, faced the truth they had avoided for so long. Patricia listened in shock as the story of her grandson, the baby they had abandoned in a moment of desperation and cowardice, was revealed to be the brilliant doctor who had saved her husband's life. When the story came to an end, a heavy silence fell over the room. Patricia, tears streaming down her face, turned to Miriam. "Thank you," she said, her voice broken with emotion. "Thank you for saving him, for loving him, for giving him everything we couldn't. We will never be able to repay you for what you've done." Miriam, moved by the sincerity in Patricia's voice, nodded gently. "I didn't do it for you," she said firmly. "I did it for him, for Gabriel, because every child deserves to be loved, to be protected. And he has become the son I always dreamed of having." Gabriel, watching the exchange between the two women, felt something shift inside him. A piece of the puzzle of his identity he hadn't known was missing seemed to fall into place. Though the pain and confusion were still there, he also felt a strange sense of wholeness, as if he could finally see the full picture of who he was. "I believe," Gabriel said, breaking the silence, "that we all have a lot to process. But I also believe that maybe, just maybe, this is an opportunity to heal, to forgive, to build something new." Patricia and Patrick nodded, tears of gratitude and regret shining in their eyes. Miriam, for her part, looked at Gabriel with a mix of pride and unconditional love. In that moment, she knew that no matter what the future held for them, the bond between them was unbreakable. The days and weeks that followed were filled with difficult conversations and raw emotions. With Miriam's unwavering support, Gabriel began to build a cautious relationship with his biological grandparents. Each meeting was a mix of pain and hope, of painful memories and the possibility of a new beginning. Patricia and Patrick, acutely aware of the unearned gift they had been given, worked hard to show their remorse and gratitude. They offered Gabriel stories about his biological parents, family photos, and pieces of a past he had never known. But always, they were careful not to overstep, respecting the place Miriam held as the central figure in Gabriel's life. Miriam, for her part, faced her own challenges. Though she knew she had done the right thing by revealing the truth, she couldn't help but feel a pang of fear each time she saw Gabriel with his biological family. What if he decided he preferred them? What if the bond of blood proved stronger than all the years of love and sacrifice? But Gabriel, as always, proved to be wiser and more compassionate than Miriam could have imagined. One evening, after an especially emotional dinner with Patricia and Patrick, Gabriel sat with Miriam on the porch of the house he had given her. "Mama," he said, taking Miriam's hands in his, "I want you to know something. Meeting Patricia and Patrick, learning about my origins, has been important to me. It's helped me understand parts of myself that were always a mystery. But nothing, absolutely nothing, will ever change what I feel for you. You are my mother in every way that matters. You were the one who saved me, who raised me, who loved me unconditionally. That will never change." With tears in her eyes, Miriam hugged Gabriel tightly. In that moment, all her doubts and fears melted away. She knew that no matter what the future held for them, the bond between them was unbreakable. As the months passed, a new dynamic began to emerge. Patricia and Patrick, eager to make up for lost time, offered to help Gabriel in his career. They had connections in the medical world that could open doors for the research Gabriel was conducting on rare childhood diseases. At first, Gabriel was reluctant. He didn't want it to seem like he was taking advantage of the situation, or that he was somehow forgiving what they had done. But Miriam, with her usual wisdom, encouraged him to reconsider. "Son," she said, "sometimes forgiveness isn't just for others, it's for ourselves. Using those connections to help sick children isn't taking advantage. It's taking something that began with pain and turning it into something beautiful." Inspired by Miriam's words, Gabriel decided to accept his grandparents' help. With their support, he secured funding for an innovative study that promised new treatments for diseases that had once been considered untreatable. The day Gabriel presented his preliminary findings at an international medical conference, his entire family was there to support him. Miriam, sitting in the front row, watched him with eyes full of pride and love. Beside her, Patricia and Patrick listened attentively, marveling at the extraordinary man their grandson had become. When Gabriel finished his presentation, the ovation was deafening. Colleagues and mentors approached to congratulate him, predicting that his work would revolutionize the field of pediatrics. But for Gabriel, the most important thing was the look of pride in Miriam's eyes. Amidst the applause and congratulations, he sought out her gaze, finding in it all the love and support that had always been his strength. That night, as they celebrated Gabriel's success at a small family restaurant, the young doctor stood up, glass in hand, to make a toast. "Today is a day of celebration," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for the advances in our research, but for something much more important. Today, we celebrate the power of love, of compassion, and of second chances." He looked at Miriam, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Mama, everything I am, everything I've achieved, is because of you. Your love and your sacrifice saved me in more ways than one. You gave me life, you gave me a home, you gave me a future. I will never be able to thank you enough. Then, turning to Patricia and Patrick, and to you, my grandparents, thank you for having the courage to face the past, to seek redemption. Your support in this project shows that even from the darkest mistakes, something beautiful can grow. The silence that followed his words was charged with emotion. Miriam, with tears streaming freely down her cheeks, stood up to hug her son. Patricia and Patrick, visibly moved, joined the embrace, forming a circle of love and forgiveness that seemed to glow with its own light. In that moment, surrounded by the love of his family, both by blood and by heart, Gabriel knew he had found his place in the world. A place forged not by genetics or the circumstances of his birth, but by the choices they had made, the love they had shared, and the strength they had found to forgive and heal. The years that followed were filled with growth and transformation for everyone. Gabriel continued to rise in his career, becoming a respected figure in the field of pediatrics. His research on rare childhood diseases saved countless lives and earned him international recognition. Miriam, finally free from the burden of the secret she had carried for so long, flourished in ways she had never expected. With Gabriel's support, she went back to school, something she had given up in her youth to raise her son. At the age of 60, Miriam graduated with honors in social work, determined to help other families facing the same challenges she had overcome. Patricia and Patrick, for their part, spent their remaining years trying to make amends for the mistakes of the past. They established a foundation in Gabriel's name, dedicated to supporting single mothers and children in vulnerable situations. Though they knew that nothing could completely erase what they had done, they found peace in the possibility of preventing other families from making the same mistakes. The relationship between Gabriel and his biological grandparents grew slowly, nurtured by mutual understanding and a genuine desire to heal. Though it never became the close relationship they might have had if circumstances had been different, it became something valuable in its own right. A relationship built on respect, gratitude, and a shared hope for a better future. But Gabriel's heart always belonged to Miriam. Every achievement, every victory, every moment of joy, he shared first with the woman who had saved and loved him unconditionally. The house he had given her years ago became the center of their lives, a place filled with laughter, love, and precious memories. It was in that very house, one summer afternoon, that Gabriel received news that would change his life once again. He had just returned from a long day at the hospital when he found Miriam sitting on the porch, an indecipherable expression on her face. "Son," Miriam said, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you." Gabriel sat beside her, taking her hands in his, concerned by the seriousness in his mother's voice. "What is it, Mama? Are you all right?" Miriam took a deep breath before speaking. "I'm fine, my love, but I received a call today. It was from Ghana, from my village." She paused, as if searching for the right words. "Gabriel, they found your biological father." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Gabriel felt as if the ground beneath his feet had disappeared, leaving him floating in a void of confusion and shock. My biological father," he managed to say. Miriam nodded, squeezing her son's hands tightly. "It seems he was a student in Ghana at the same university where your biological mother studied. He returned to Ghana shortly after you were born. He never knew about your existence." Gabriel's mind was a whirlwind of emotions and questions. All his life, he had assumed he would never know his biological parents. That part of his story had been lost forever. And now, suddenly, a new door had opened, a new possibility for connection with his roots. He wants to meet me?" Gabriel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Miriam nodded again. "Yes, son. He's as shocked as you are. He says he never knew he had a child, that if he had known, he would have done things differently." Gabriel stood up, needing to move, to process this new information. He walked to the edge of the porch, staring out at the garden he and Miriam had tended together over the years. Every flower, every tree was a testament to the love and care they had shared. He turned to Miriam, seeing in her eyes the same unconditional love that had always been there. What do you think, Mama? Do you think I should meet him? Miriam stood and walked over to him, placing a gentle hand on his cheek. My love, that's a decision only you can make. But I want you to know something. Nothing, absolutely nothing, will ever change what you are to me. You are my son, my pride, my joy. If you decide to meet him, I will support you. And if you decide you don't want to, I will understand. Gabriel hugged Miriam tightly, once again grateful for her wisdom and her unconditional love. Thank you, Mama. I don't know what I would do without you. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. Gabriel spoke with Patricia and Patrick, seeking their advice and support. Though they were surprised by the news, they offered their unconditional support, recognizing that this was an opportunity for Gabriel to learn about a part of himself that had always been a mystery. Finally, after much reflection and long conversations with Miriam, Gabriel decided he wanted to meet his biological father. They arranged a video call, a meeting that promised to be emotionally charged for everyone involved. The day of the call arrived, and Gabriel sat in front of his computer, with Miriam by his side. Her presence, as always, was a source of strength and support. When the image of a middle-aged man with features that Gabriel recognized as his own appeared on the screen, the world seemed to stop for a moment. Hello, Gabriel, the man said, his voice trembling slightly. I'm Adeyemi. Your father. Gabriel felt his heart pounding in his chest. Hello, he managed to say, his own voice barely a whisper. What followed was a conversation filled with emotions, of long-held questions and honest answers. Adeyemi told Gabriel about his life in Ghana, about how he had never forgotten the young American student he had met so many years ago. He spoke of his shock at discovering he had a son, of his regret for the years that had been lost, and of his desire to know the man his son had become. Gabriel, for his part, shared his story. He told Adeyemi about Miriam, how she had saved him and raised him with unconditional love. He spoke of his achievements, of his career as a doctor, of the family he had built with Patricia, Patrick, and Miriam. As the conversation continued, Gabriel felt something settle inside him, a piece of the puzzle of his identity that he hadn't been actively searching for, but that now, having found it, made him feel more complete. When the call ended, Gabriel turned to Miriam, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, offering her quiet support. Mama, Gabriel said, his voice thick with emotion, thank you. Thank you for giving me the strength to do this, for always being by my side. Miriam hugged him tightly, her own eyes filled with tears. I will always be here for you, my love. Always. In the months that followed, Gabriel began to build a cautious relationship with Adeyemi. They exchanged emails and had regular calls, learning about each other, filling in the gaps of a shared story they were only beginning to write. But amidst this new connection, Gabriel never forgot who he was and where he truly came from. Miriam remained the center of his world, his rock, his true mother in every way that mattered. A year after that first virtual meeting, Gabriel made a decision. He organized a trip to Ghana, not only to meet Adeyemi in person, but also to visit the village where Miriam had been born. He wanted to connect with all parts of his heritage, to honor both his biological roots and the roots of love that Miriam had planted and nurtured throughout his life. The day before they left for Ghana, Gabriel took Miriam for a walk in the park where they used to go when he was a child. As they strolled under the trees that had witnessed so many happy moments, Gabriel stopped and took his mother's hands in his. Mama, he said, his voice full of emotion, I want you to know something before we go to Ghana. No matter what I find there, no matter what new connections I make or what parts of my story I discover, you are and always will be my true mother. You are the one who gave me life in every way that matters. You are the one who taught me to love, to forgive, to be strong. Everything I am, everything I've achieved, is because of you. With tears in her eyes, Miriam hugged her son tightly. Oh, Gabriel, she whispered, you have been my greatest blessing, my greatest joy. I am so proud of the man you've become, so grateful for every moment we've shared. As they embraced under the afternoon sun, Gabriel felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. His life had been full of unexpected twists, of challenges and revelations, but through it all, Miriam's love had been his constant, his North Star, his home. And now, as he prepared to embark on a new chapter of his life, Gabriel knew he would carry that love with him, like a guiding light, illuminating the path to whatever future awaited him. Because in the end, that was the true lesson Gabriel had learned throughout his extraordinary journey. That love, true love, transcends blood and circumstances. That family is not defined by genetics, but by the bonds of the heart. And that sometimes the greatest blessings in life come from the most unexpected places. As Gabriel and Miriam walked back home, hand in hand, the sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was a beautiful end to a day, but for them, it was only the beginning of a new chapter in their extraordinary story of love, forgiveness, and redemption. And so, with hearts full of love and eyes set on the future, Gabriel and Miriam prepared for their next adventure, knowing that no matter what the future held, they would always have each other. Because in the end, that was all that really mattered. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the story. I'm sure the next video appearing on your screen will also move you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. A big kiss and see you in the next story.